Before we convert the notes or to-do applications, there's one more thing we need to learn about, and that's how we can use third-party libraries with JavaScript modules. So the to-do application takes advantage of the UUID v4 library. We're going to learn how we can install that library via npm, then load it in via import. To demonstrate this technique, we're just going to be adding a little bit of code to the Hangman application right here in index.js, but we'll end up deleting it by the end. The goal is to just figure out how we can do this, even though the Hangman project doesn't need a third-party module to run. If you remember, we had found the UUID library in the browser. If you Google GitHub UUID, that'll bring us over to the library page right here. And we had used this page to figure out exactly how we can load in the library and run things. If we scroll down on this page to the documentation, we'll notice that one of the first things shown right here is actually the npm install command. So this is exactly what we're going to do to get the library installed in our project. So over in the terminal, like we've done plenty of times before, we're going to install this library. In the terminal, I have things shut down. I can use npm install with the library UUID. Then we are going to specify the latest version after the @ 3.2.1. Perfect. Let's go ahead and actually run the installation and now talk about what's going to happen. So what we're going to end up doing from index.js or whatever file happens to need it is adding an import statement that imports that library code. This is then going to allow us to use that library functionality in the specific file. So just like I import Hangman in this file because I need the Hangman class, I would import UUID in this file if I needed it here. If I didn't need it here, but I needed it in the requests file, I would add the import here instead. So we're using the JavaScript module system just like we've been using it already with the code we wrote. The only difference is we're loading in third-party code. So in the terminal, we can see the npm installation command did succeed. So let's go ahead and cycle through the previous commands and get the dev server up and running once again, since we are going to want to test things out locally on our machines. Over inside of the documentation, it actually describes exactly how we can use it. Now, if you remember from earlier, we had used the v4 algorithm, and I told you that the versions didn't mean one was newer or one was older. The versions just talk about exactly how the ID is generated, and this is a completely random one, which is what we want. Now down below, we have a little code sample as to how we can use this, but you'll notice that the import keyword is nowhere to be found. What we're seeing in the documentation is actually a call to require. Now we only used require in our Webpack config file, and we know it comes from Node.js. So the documentation we're seeing here is for Node. We can still use this library in the browser. We just have to change this first line, which uses require, over to an import statement. Then we'll be able to call the function down below exactly as we're already doing in our other programs. So we have UUID installed, which means that all we have to do is import things. Let's go ahead and knock that out over inside of index.js. Now, when it comes to importing something from a third-party module, you have to refer to the documentation. Imagine you didn't actually create the Hangman file and you didn't want to dive into a whole bunch of code and figure out exactly what it exported. How would you ever know to grab Hangman as the default export? You'd have to refer to the docs to figure that out. So for our purposes, we get the UUID v4 function as the default export. So right here, import UUID v4 from, and this piece right here, the piece inside of quotes, typically also comes from the documentation. So over here, I can see I have to load in UUID/v4 to get the correct function back. I could use UUID/v3 to get the version 3 back. Right here, UUID/v4. So even if we are seeing something from Node.js, we can convert that over to an import call without too much trouble. Typically, whatever comes back from a require function call in Node would be the default export for import. And this is the case for UUID. Now, what does this mean for us? Well, it means we now have access to that function in this file, and we can actually use it. I'm going to test things out down below by just using console.log to print a unique ID to the console. I'm going to call UUID v4, passing in no arguments since it accepts none. I'll pass that right to console.log to print it. I'm going to save index.js, and now we can actually start up the dev server again from the terminal. That's npm run dev-server. Once that's up, we'll be able to refresh the browser, and hopefully, if everything went right, we actually see a unique ID. All right, the dev server is up. I'm going to give the page a refresh, and what are we getting? We are getting a unique ID showing up. Now, if I were to refresh again, we would get a different unique ID, and there it is. It's coming from index.js on line 5, which is indeed correct. So the source maps are working here as well. Now that we've installed and used one third-party library, I want to run through that process one more time with a library we've never used before, just to give you a bit more experience. It's really essential to get comfortable working with these third-party libraries because it can really save you a lot of time in the long run. There are a lot of problems we might want to solve in our JavaScript app, but these might be problems that other people needed to solve as well, like generating a unique ID. So it's not essential for us to write all the code, actually learn how those things work, then make sure the code's working correctly and change it over time. Instead, we can take this common thing, generating a unique ID, and we can essentially outsource it to a library like UUID. Let's go ahead and run through just one more example with one more NPM library. Over inside of the browser, I'm going to search npm validator. This is going to pull up the validator package on npm, and this is the one that we're going to be installing and using. Well, I said us, but it's actually you. It's going to be your challenge to install this package, import it, and then use one of the methods it provides. If we scroll down on this page, what we end up seeing is the documentation for the validator library. It shows us how to install it and how to use it. Right here, we have the installation command. Here we have some node examples. Down below, we have an example using import. And it's nice that the validator contributors actually showed us how to use it with import. Clearly, we were able to do so with UUID, but we kind of had to figure it out for ourselves. Most libraries, though, will explicitly tell you how to use it in each environment. Now, if you want to view the GitHub repository, you can do so via a link in this stats bar. And what you're going to find there is the exact same documentation we're seeing here. It's copied over to the package homepage to make NPM as useful as possible. So one of the methods we have available to us is called isEmail. They're actually using it right here with the node example. IsEmail checks if something is an email. If it is an email, it returns true. If it is not, it returns false. And this is the method I want you to take advantage of in our project. So your challenge is going to be to install the validator library, to import it, and then to call isEmail, printing the Boolean value to the console. Test it out with a valid email and an invalid email. You can grab the latest version right up here on the right-hand side. Currently, it is 9.4.1. If you're seeing a different version here, that's fine. You can go ahead and install that. All right, take some time to install it, import it, and use it over inside of index.js, just like we did with UUID v4. Then test your work. When you're done, come back and click play. How'd that go? Hopefully you were able to knock that out without too much trouble. I'm going to kick things off by installing the library. Now you can notice that we can run npm install to install a library without specifying a version. It's typically not ideal to do this. It's usually best to be explicit about the version you want to use since libraries do change over time. So we're going to go ahead and install 9.4.1 from the terminal. Right here, I'm going to shut things down. npm install validator at 9.4.1. We're going to let this command run, and once it's done, we'll just start up the dev server, then we'll switch over to Visual Studio Code to actually use the module. Looks like we are all wrapped up. I'm going to use the up arrow twice and the enter key to rerun the previous command. Over inside of Visual Studio Code, we can now take advantage of this. Now, the nice thing is that the documentation provided the exact statement we needed to use. Import validator from the validator library. Now we have access to validator, and as we saw on there, we have that isEmail method. So down below, let's go ahead and use it. Console.log. I'm going to call validator.isEmail, and I'm going to pass in a valid email. We'll start there. So I'll use something like Andrew at mead.com. I do not own that domain or that email, so don't email it. I'm going to save index.js. Over inside of the Hangman application, what do we get? We get true showing up. So if I was trying to validate an email, this would be a valid one. Now let's go ahead and try an invalid one like Andrew. I save the file this time around, and what do I get in the browser? I get false. So this is not a valid email, and we would be able to reject that data. So being able to take advantage of third-party libraries like UUID or Validator are going to allow us to focus on the specifics of our application and not worry about generic tasks that a lot of applications need. You can actually see that in the last 7 days, there was over 1 million downloads of this library, which is ridiculous. A lot of people are taking advantage of this code, so they don't have to go through the process of writing and maintaining it on their own. If you scroll way down on this page, you can explore more of the methods available to us should you want to use them in the future. We have all sorts of interesting things right here. There's about 40 or so different methods allowing us to validate pretty much whatever we want. For example, we can check if something is one of those hex colors. If we're creating some sort of application around design, we can check if something is JSON. There are a lot of interesting ways we can check things. We got postal codes, URLs, UUIDs, a lot of really cool tools. So I recommend looking for third-party libraries for common problems before you decide to write a bunch of code on your own. All right, now that we've seen how we can use these in our project, we're going to move on and actually use them with the To-Do app during the conversion process. I'm going to go ahead and remove all of the code we added to index.js in this file. Then, from the terminal, I'm going to shut things down, and I am going to use npm uninstall to uninstall the libraries we just added. From here, we have to provide the names of the libraries we want to remove. I want to remove UUID, and I want to remove Validator. This is an alternative to just manually removing things from package.json. We can run this command. It's going to remove both of those from package.json and node modules. And once this command completes, we'll be all done with this video. All right, that's it for this one. I'll see you in the next video where we're going to continue learning about JavaScript modules.